Once upon a time, there was a princess. And that's about all you're getting out of me telling you about a fairy tale, because it's time to talk about Go Princess Precure, a season that has always struck me as being one of the oddities of the franchise. You see, Go Princess is a season that I have often seen being lauded for its characters and story, placed as one of the greats at the top of the pyramid when looking at Precure seasons that older fans really embrace. People love this season, and I think it's one of the top 3 to be recommended to people. Yet at the same time, it's one of the worst selling in the history of the franchise, especially when you take into account the rest of the era that it was in. There could be a few reasons for this. Happiness Charge was a pretty weak season, and even if this is a franchise that is very much acting with each season being separate outside of crossovers, it's entirely possible for a poor season to shake confidence in the one that comes after it. Much in the same way that the one that came before can set expectations for the next to be pretty high. Some of that low interest could be because this was the season that came out in the thick of Frozen fever in the wake of that movie's release. While sometimes a rising tide can lift all boats, I think this was a case where one princess was not going to pull the others up when she was dominating in basically every form she came in. However, the number of toy sales of a season is not something that is indicative of its quality. While it comes down to personal taste, I highly doubt that any attempt of mine to organize and rank the seasons that I've watched would line up with a sales chart. I'm not going to beat around the bush though. Go Princess is perhaps one of the finest seasons of Precure that I've watched so far. There are some elements of it that I don't entirely love, but what it does do so well shines so brightly that I don't care quite as much about those small places where it stumbles. This is perhaps the fastest that I've ever binged a season, mostly down to the fact that I was having so much fun watching that I didn't want to stop. Yet at the same time, the reason this has taken so long is because it was one that took the longest for me to organize my thoughts on and write about. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who longed to be a princess, dreaming of the day she might become a princess in her own right, just like the flower princess in her favorite storybook. However, she was taunted for this desire by her peers, who could not appreciate her love for this character or for princesses. She left to be alone, but while consoling herself, she was greeted by an actual prince who comforted her and offered her a gift, telling her not to give up on her dreams. With this, her resolve was made stronger, but could she become a princess after all? Haruka is our lead character for this season, and she is one of the strongest pink leads that I think we've had in a hot second. She's a very bright presence from the moment that she shows up on screen, and she's definitely taking us back to those times where the pink lead isn't exactly academically inclined and not really the best at what she's doing. She's a little more bumbling than our last 2 leads were, and there are more points where she just kind of outright fails at what she's doing. That also means that Haruka picks herself up, dusts herself off, and keeps going quite a bit, giving her a pretty strong sense of determination. Every girl in this season has a dream, but Haruka is the only one who starts off kind of having a complex about hers. For, you see, Haruka's dream is to become a princess, inspired by her favorite childhood storybook about the flower princess. The reason that she has a complex is that she was teased about this when she was a child, something I think a lot of kids might relate to. After this round of teasing as a kid, she did run off and had a chance meeting with Kanata, a literal prince that we'll get to talking about later. He gifted her with a little princess dress-shaped trinket to encourage her, something that would turn out to later be a part of what she needed to transform into a Precure. What I like, though, is that this meeting and this gift did not inherently cure her anxiety about her dream being teased. It encouraged her to hold on to it, but when she's a teenager, she still has that anxiety about others finding out what her dream is. Granted, that doesn't last very long in the series proper, but you do still have that sense of her fear of being mocked being something she carried with her for quite a while. Even if she does overcome shying away from telling people about her dream, she still has that experience as a part of her journey to achieve it, and it does come up again, even showing up in the final episode. Having that context for her means that when we see her encouraging others to follow their dreams or trying to defend the dreams of others, it feels a little more impactful because she definitely knows how it feels to have her dream trampled on and knows just how much that encouragement from someone outside yourself can be a really helpful pick-me-up to keep you going. This isn't the first time that a season of Precure has really focused on dreams and striving towards them. After all, we had a season about that in Yes 5 where the lead cure was literally called Cure Dream. However, I think this is a season where dreams feel the most intertwined with everything going on, since we see several different approaches to how our leads are dealing with their dreams, and really see them acting as defenders of dreams, since those are what get locked up in order to create the monster of the week this time around. For Haruka, it's a little bit hard to really pin down her dream, and part of that is because her dream, as stated at the start of the season, is sort of fundamentally unachievable. Princesses are something that are, in just about every case, hereditary. You become a princess because one of your parents is a monarchical ruler in some form. You don't really just decide to be a princess, work real hard, and then end up as one. There's no systemic way for you to climb to that position, and there's not some skill you can learn and become adept at that will allow you to become one. That's just not fundamentally how that works. There's an option to become a princess by marriage, but that's clearly not something that even seems to cross Haruka's mind. This is something that sort of evolves over the course of the season. One would think being declared to be a princess precure would be what fulfills her dream, but no, that just won't do. Her dream is to be a princess, not a princess precure, so she sets out to do all she can to become one. This starts with her taking things at a pretty superficial level, though. She focuses on ballet and violin and things that feel vaguely princess-like and elegant as her framework for what she needs to learn to be a proper princess. This is only encouraged when we get introduced to the princess tutor character that starts giving her princess lessons, that she in turn both succeeds and fails at, a sort of push and pull of her trying things in order to reach that princess state. We also get introduced to the three ideals that are sort of guiding the whole princess mindset of the series: strength, kindness, and beauty. Each of these is sort of associated with one girl in the main trio, Haruka getting strength, which does make sense as she is the character that's most strong of heart the whole season. These standards start to inform Haruka's conception of a princess. She starts becoming someone who leads by example and puts it all on the line to protect others. Just after the midpoint of the season, Haruka experiences something that is a pretty crushing blow. Kanata, the very person who encouraged her to hold on to her dream, instead tells her it's not going to happen and to give up on it, echoing the sentiments that she heard from her childhood peers. This is crushing and breaks her spirit enough that she temporarily loses all capability to transform. That encouragement is something she was really holding on to in order to keep herself going. What I love, though, is even though he does apologize for saying that, his apology is not what remotivates her and allows her to grab back onto her dream. She finds the internal strength to reach out for it again herself. She shifts from having that motivation coming from Kanata's belief in her to more of a belief in herself, symbolized by her young self that spurs this. Well, I think the season could have worked without that specific shift from her because, while Kanata's encouragement was important, it was never to the point of feeling like a sole motivator. I do like that they did this in order to give Haruka some more personal control over her dreams and ambitions. It really is one of those moments that highlights her determination. Early on in the season, Haruka gets the chance to actually talk to the author of the book she loves so much that inspired her towards wanting to be a princess, and she specifically wants to ask about the ending. Basically, it ends with the princess heading towards the castle, but there are still some open questions about what's to come next for her. Haruka has wondered about that for a long time and wants to finally get an answer, but she's denied one. The author always intended for the story to be open-ended so that each and every child could come up with their own full ending of what became of the princess, and it doesn't make sense to add an ending now since that would be invalidating all the endings that children have already come up with for the story. While upsetting at first, that is an answer that Haruka comes to accept. Very close to the end of the season, Haruka ends up getting sort of put in a dream bubble where she gets to live out a version of what comes next as the Flower Princess, something that is meant to be a perfect little bubble of an experience to keep her trapped, and it ultimately fails. Why? Because being that archetypal princess that is pampered and doted on sucks. She's not allowed to do a thing for herself, and everything around her feels completely unearned, which doesn't sit right with her. It becomes clear that Haruka wants being a princess to be something that is an active effort for her, something to strive for rather than something that she just contentedly sits in. Now, this disregards the way that real-life princesses could often be highly educated young women who served important political roles, even if that political role might have included marriage, because they are, political figures. However, this isn't a series that's looking at princesses from the real-world lens, but rather the concept of the fairy tale princess, something that is somewhat more simplified. After she gets out of this, she is confronted by a simple fact. Her dream and the way she is chasing it is something that she cannot ever fully reach. It has no end, and she will always be chasing it rather than achieving it. This is being said in a way that is meant to tear Haruka down, but it only serves to do the opposite. Haruka is thrilled that she can chase her dream for the rest of her life because she finds purpose in it and enjoys the pursuit of her dream. Chasing her dream has allowed her to meet so many people and try many new things, and that is perfectly fine with her if the dream doesn't have an end destination. And I find that to be such an interesting approach to handling this whole situation of a girl having a dream to be a princess while also being put in a story that does later have a literal princess as part of it, and as a result kind of highlights that you cannot just will yourself into being one. I think it makes Haruka a little more compelling to be someone that is so clearly working hard to refine herself in that way, and that makes it feel good to see her grow into a more rounded person as the season goes on, and shows that growth is something that's going to happen forever. It doesn't just stop when you reach maturity, it continues for the rest of your life. I'm not the same person I was at the end of high school or at the end of college. I've grown and changed a lot since then, even though I'm supposedly already a grown-up. Growth doesn't have an endpoint, so Haruka's dream doesn't have to either. It seems to me that Haruka has internally come up with some definition of what being a princess means to her. She has her own conception of what exactly a princess is and what she personally wants to do in order to strive to be one. While I can make some guesses about what that might perhaps mean for her, there's never really a point where she has a big speech and comes out and says, "This is what I think being a princess means," or "This is my view of what a princess should be." On one hand, that does make it a little bit harder to fully understand the point she's at the end of the season, what ways she has changed in her view of princesses from the start. Yet on the other hand, I do like this approach because it allows her idea of a princess to be something that grows and evolves as she grows and evolves. I do get a sense that she has more of an idea of leadership, having led her team, that maybe perhaps plays into things, or that she might see herself as something of an example or a protector because of her experience as a precure over the course of the season. However, like I said, it's hard to get a full read on what exactly she's taking away from this. Yet, I like that. It means that even though she's found her idea of what a princess is, that does not have to be the same idea of what a princess is to the viewer. It encourages them to also find their own personal definition. At the end of the season, we get a little bit of a flash forward to what each of our main characters are doing with themselves down the line, and it's worth noting that Haruka's is not actually very specific, and mostly just shows a snapshot of her taking in a flower field from a hill, much as we have seen her do before. This is meant to sort of mirror the way the character in the book she loved didn't have a definitive ending. We're left to sort of come up with whatever we think Haruka has gone on to do in the same way that she was with the book, which is a nice little follow-through on that element of the series that was set up quite a while back, and keeps up with her having that flower princess as a recurring motif of her journey. It also, though, ties into the way that she is going to be forever chasing that dream, and shows that she's still doing so even past the point that the series ends. Once upon a time, there was a girl who was born not only into the lap of luxury, but a family who loved her dearly. As she grew, she had access to the best of everything, but this did not spoil her, and instead only enhanced her opportunities to excel, priming her to stand beside her family and join them at the top of the business world when she was grown. As she matured, she grew to have a seemingly effortless grace, becoming a young lady that was a leader to her peers and looked upon like she was a princess of the school. Her course was set, but what if a different passion caught her heart? Minami is an archetype that we have seen before, the prim and proper young lady sort of character, also serving as the student council president to only further highlight her sense of diligence and intelligence. It's not something that's entirely new to Precure, but because of the way that her family situation has been laid out, the context feels a little more fresh. You see, Minami is part of a family that is just absurdly wealthy, owning resorts and all sorts of other businesses that allowed her to grow up in the lap of luxury with anything that anyone could ask for. There is a sort of expectation that when she grows up, she will go on to become part of the family business, standing as part of the leadership team. Her brother has already done so, and it only makes sense that Minami will do the same. Her being involved in leadership opportunities at her school is essentially getting her in practice for her future career, which does make it feel a little more tied into everything she has going on, even if we don't actually see her doing student council nearly as much as we've perhaps seen from some other characters. Her work ethic is one of the strongest elements of her character early on in the series. When we first meet Minami, she seems to be this picture of effortless elegance that nearly floats through life. Nearly everyone in the school looks at her like she's some kind of shining gem that can do no wrong, and it seems like she is adept at basically everything she does. Even Haruka thinks this, viewing Minami as someone who is already a princess of the school. Yet it's made clear that this is not something that happened overnight. Minami does not just walk into a new thing and immediately pick it up like it is second nature. Her leadership comes from a lifetime of watching her family lead. Her ballet skills are the result of years of practice. It only looks easy because it's something that she has put her mind to and honed. She's not some perfect person, but the result of effort put in. That's the starting point that we get with her, but it's not something that ends up being a real through line for her story in the season. It's just a foundation that she ends up getting built off of. However, it's a really solid foundation that makes you appreciate everywhere she goes after that a little bit more. Even from the start, you have a really clear picture of Minami as a character in your mind, and that helps to carry her a lot through the season. You see, the portion of Minami's story that perhaps feels the most defining about her is something that doesn't kick in until we're pretty deep into the season. It's not like she gets nothing to do before that point, it's just serving something of a different purpose than with some of the other characters. For most of the season, we are spending time establishing the bonds that Minami has. We spend time with her and her brother, we spend time with her in the ocean, we have some focal episodes, not just telling us, but showing us how important both the sea and the ocean are to her, and the ways that both have been foundational and how she came up, how she's deeply bonded with a dolphin, the way that these are things that she would go to any lengths to defend. We're not really seeing her relationship with these things change, but we're having it laid out before us and perhaps deepened a little bit. This is all in service for what is coming for her later down the line, so we can really feel the emotional stakes that she's grappling with. Minami, like I said, has been sort of raised under the assumption that she will one day join the family business. Even though she's still a teenager and still in school, we can already see that there are points where she is lightly involved. She's regularly at events with her parents, and there is one episode where it's specifically mentioned she'll be going to an event to stand in for her mother when she can't make it. Her brother has already finished school and gone on in things, and her family is clearly looking forward to working with her and making preparations for when that time will come. Minami herself says that this is the dream she's working towards. This is what she's looking forward to and striving for, and everything we see from her leads us to believe her. After all, it is the role of a girl in Precure to chase their dreams and eventually grasp them. As viewers, we expect that Minami will follow through on this path, even if it's not a story that's terribly interesting. What really makes Minami shine is the way that she shifts later in the season. Minami meets Asuka, a marine life expert and veterinarian. She doesn't spend a lot of time with her, but the two very clearly connect over their love of the sea and the life within it. Asuka takes a shine to Minami and very clearly sees her as someone who has potential in her field if that was something that Minami wanted to do. But Minami already has a dream, already has something she's working towards, so she politely turns Asuka down, even though she fights very hard to protect Asuka's dream when she becomes the victim of the week. And that is where Minami gets really interesting, because we've had Precure girls sort of discover something they have a passion for over the course of a season before. We saw that with a few of the characters in the S5, for example. However, this is the first time we've had a Precure girl who already had a dream she was striving towards realize that there is something else that calls to her even more. You see, it's not that Minami loses a passion for her family's work or realizes that she hates it. She very much could be content there. However, content is not the same thing as fulfilled, and she slowly realizes that there is something she would rather devote herself to, a calling of many preteen girls, marine biology. This is a realization that the show takes its time with, too. It's not that single episode spent with Asuka that makes her completely change her goals in life. It's just one encounter that makes her begin thinking about things. It's a decent handful of episodes before she admits to herself that she has something different she wants to do, and after that, it's a hurdle to get her to admit that to her family as well. They take it well because, like a good loving family, all they really want is for her to be happy at the end of the day. As an adult viewer who knows tropes, that's kind of what we expect to see out of this sort of show. From the moment the conflict is presented, and from what we know, the conclusion is pretty obvious. However, that's not Minami's perspective, and you do understand just how difficult telling them this must have been for her. After all, she's been nothing but the good, invested daughter this whole time, and all of them have talked about how much they're looking forward to working alongside her. She's taking all that away from them by choosing a different path. In that light, it's not surprising she might think her dreams are something selfish. They're not, though, because chasing your dreams is a good thing, and her family is all too happy to support her. But that moment that she does have to tell them that she's changed and found her own way, that's a brave thing, and it makes her compelling. She's one of my favorites that Precure has presented by putting her through this. This is one of the times that we have most seen the family of a girl and the background that she comes from inform her as a character and the journey she takes, which makes her feel rich and whole in a way that some characters don't always get to be. She might spend a lot of the time in her group this season just kind of being a voice of reason and a relatively well-adjusted person, but that means that the moments that her passions shine through feel even brighter and makes it feel all the more troubling when she is shaken out of that pristine form that she usually has. Once upon a time, there was a girl who wished to shine brighter than the stars, much like her mother did. She longed to stand beside her in the spotlight and worked tirelessly to become someone who could. Adventure called to her, despite her rejection of it, and she took the challenge upon herself to chase adventure and her dream all at once. Yet someday, she would have to choose between the two, and what would that choice be? Kira is downright my favorite character of the season. She's just this bright spark of energy in the cast and makes herself such a presence that you can't help but notice her. But it never crosses into the realm of being irritating. She's bold without being hyperactive and decisive without being impulsive. You get a real sense that she does think about her actions before taking them, and that's what leads to this innate sense of confidence that she has. However, in those quieter moments, you can really see the ways the gears are turning in her mind and just how self-reflective of a character she is. She's a character that, to me, feels the most able to take a step back and look at something she's done in order to learn from it. She might not take exactly the right lesson from it because she's a teenager, but she is the one that seems to most reflect on where she has come from in order to start moving forward. Kira immediately makes her mark by doing something that we have never seen from a Precure girl before her. She refuses the call to action. In the first episode where we get to know Kira, we find out she is working as a model. She's actually been doing that for a while now and is pretty well known by the time the season starts. She's not a superstar or anything, but she has been in enough campaigns and regional magazines that she's got a resume and gets a little recognition now and then, helped by the way that her mom is a bona fide supermodel. Though that is something that Kira never rests on. She takes her own steps forward to progress her career and doesn't use her mother's name to make any of that. A show she ends up taking part in ends up getting attacked, and in the middle of that, she ends up transforming in order to help out and deal with the situation. The moment it ends, Haruka and Minami are excited to welcome her to the team. Kira is a little caught off guard by this and just politely turns them down. After all, she's got so much going on and doesn't have time for that sort of thing. It isn't until she and Haruka spend time together and she gets time to reflect on both that and their commiseration over dreams that she makes the choice to actually get involved. Giving her that breathing room and letting her get to the point of stepping up for herself rather than just because destiny or someone else said she had to does make it clear just how much Kira is the one who is making the choice to do this. She's doing this because she believes in protecting the dreams of others and because she personally believes that it's the right thing to do. That is, overall, a small difference, but it's one that matters and one that makes her feel more whole, just like some of the choices made with the other girls. And I appreciate that Kira is pretty firm in the way that she's not going to let Precure get in the way of her career or her dream. There are points where things are finished and she basically takes off right away to get back to a job or back to whatever else she was doing. Having those moments really just drives home the way that she is balancing many elements in her life, juggling all these different things to try and keep on track. We see her successes and her failures at this. It gives just a sense of how much goes into her career. One thing that stands out to me is just how much more of an involved depiction this is of modeling than we saw with Miki and Fresh. Part of this is because Kira is a working model while Miki was trying to get her start, and part of it is that modeling is something that feels very core to Kira as a person, and it's something that she has wholly invested herself into. In contrast to the ways it came up a few sparse times with Miki and was more a background element to her character than anything else. However, this means that with Kira, modeling is being presented as work she undeniably enjoys, but work nonetheless. It's not just putting on pretty clothes now and then and getting some pictures taken. It's something she puts thought and effort into. I think just that small amount of adjustment is enough to make it feel like a more palatable presentation than we have seen in some past seasons. I don't expect a kids show to get into the cutthroat side of an industry like this, but I do expect it to treat this as what it is, a job. It rarely sits right with me that we have these sort of entertainment jobs presented completely uncritically to kids, so I do appreciate the way that this season goes out of its way to show the ways that being involved in this ripples through most aspects of Kira's life. Like, there are other girls who are affected by her. She has a character that's a rival, or at least views herself that way, and that displays that this is an industry that has competition in it, even if the show presents it in a comedic and friendly light. Then you have another character, Karin, who is taking on a bit of a mentee role model and is learning from Kirara. There are relationships that are built out of her choice and career, and we see how those affect her personally. And that's what makes what happens later hit all the harder and makes the ultimate conclusion of her story work at all. Late in the season, Kirara's career has really taken off, helped in large part by the way that she caught the eye of an auteur designer that wants to make use of her early in the season. This presents her with the chance to model at a big event in New York City, a big career moment for her that has a lot riding on it. The episode itself has a lot of emphasis on all the work she has done so far in the way that she is striving forwards towards her dream at all times. And when she is on the way to the airport to get on her flight, Karin is attacked by the season villains. The rest of the team tells her to just get on her flight and they'll handle it. However, now knowing that Karin wants to be a model because Kirara inspired her and having a relationship with her, Kirara just can't let herself run towards her own dreams with no consideration for anyone else. So she turns around and joins the fight, essentially letting go of her dream to protect someone else's. She misses her flight and misses out on the opportunity altogether, causing such a firestorm with this that it takes several opportunities and seemingly is going to be a massive setback, if not end to her career. But it was worth it to her, because she did the right thing, even if it cost her. Now, if we take a step back and look at this logically, there are holes here. Like, the fight is over pretty quickly. Unless she was getting to the airport exactly as the flight was boarding, that tiny delay shouldn't have been enough for her to completely miss the flight. If we're smart, we're getting to the airport early, and Kira does strike me as someone who would be all about getting to the airport well in advance of her flight. And missing her flight does not mean she can't catch another one. It might be tighter, but I doubt that single flight was the only way of getting to New York, even if she did miss it, and I doubt even more that she wouldn't be getting into the city at least a day in advance of the event in order to leave ample time to make sure that everything was all set. There was no way that she was expected to touch down and be on the runway the same day. If that was the case, an outside flight delay could have caused the exact same problem, and if she is so key to this, that's not a chance that anyone is taking. But thinking about this moment logically and trying to find the plot holes doesn't change that this is a story beat that works so much on an emotional level. We understand the emotional stakes even if the logical ones don't make perfect sense, and I think it's a testament to just how much the lead into this moment and the emotionality of how it was handled made me forget about the way it doesn't logically track for just a little bit. That makes it good drama. Like, that inconsistency is still there and all, but if the story works on an emotional level, then we can sometimes forgive a moment or two where it lapses a little bit in constructing a tight world. What sells this even more, though, is that there are consequences for the choice that Kirara makes. Not only does she not get to walk the runway in this big event that she was looking forward to, there are long-term consequences for how she's viewed in her field, and there are legitimately damaging effects to her career. So often, shows for kids can have things just kind of work out and can hand-wave those consequences, but this season is pretty consistent about just what kind of damage she would have done to her career by no-showing for a job like this. It's a really good way to show that her choices don't happen in a vacuum. I could see another version of this where her mother's name or her agent or the designer just sort of waves a hand and takes away all the negative consequences for what she did. But that's not the angle they go for here. This is an action, and the world reacts to it as we would expect the world to in reality. That's an important detail, and I appreciate a show aimed at young kids putting out there that sometimes doing the right thing has consequences that might not be so happy. And these aren't single episode consequences either. These are something that does follow Kira and emotionally affect her. Well, it's only for one episode more, but we're closing in on the end game of the season at that point, so we need to start wrapping things up for the characters. It makes sense to do that right away with Kira to avoid just having her be in a sad funk in the background for multiple episodes on end. So, the very next episode, we find out that she is putting her career on hold. This is both framed as having to step back and reevaluate things in the wake of the choice she made, but it also feels a little bit like this is also a way to give her the option to sunset her career without outright quitting. It's never made completely clear which direction Kira is feeling for this, but one thing is for sure that she's not really feeling modeling right now. Understandably so. The people in her life who support her modeling even show up at the school, with that auteur designer there again to offer her a specific job, but she turns it down without even hearing what it is. She thought that she could run herself double, putting everything into modeling and putting everything into being a pretty cure, and when confronted with the idea that she might have to choose between the two, she did indeed make her choice, and that is the choice she's now choosing to stick with, even if it hurts. That just won't do, though, because her dream is involved, and they set up a fashion show where everyone is supposed to dress up as their dream. Kirara does watch, but her watching it was never any intention. She is meant to walk in it too, to be reminded of just how hard she's worked and just how much she wants to achieve. The final note of her arc in the season is her getting her groove back, and that leads into her season endgame. She takes the job offered to her, but it means going to Paris to work long term. So a quiet time limit is put on the rest of their adventure, even if it's never really treated as such by the show. Kira is going to leave, and she's going to chase her dream. And she's even there when Minami starts having her doubts, able to act as a sounding board for her since she's gotten to her endgame and kind of has things figured out. It lets her kind of call Minami's bluffs in a way that the other characters aren't quite able to. If Haruka's journey was about finding that personal definition and reclaiming a childhood dream, and Minami's story is about realizing that there is a different dream that she wanted to chase, then Kirara's journey is ultimately about working hard in pursuit of a dream and then overcoming a stumbling block that gets in the way. Once upon a time, there was a princess that was the shining jewel of her family and beloved by her kingdom. She shared a strong bond with her elder brother and longed to be a grand princess that could do good for her homeland. One day, a voice called to her, making promises to aid her ambitions, though never intending to do so. And so the princess was corrupted and molded to suit dark means. Would she ever be free to pursue her own dreams again? Toa is a character that I find it a little hard to talk about, enough so that she, along with Haruka, tripped me up when it came to getting this video written. In some ways, Toa is deeply and intrinsically tied into what the season is doing. She has bonds that run deep. Yet, in other ways, Toa ends up feeling like something of an afterthought in how the season is constructed. A character that was made the mid-season hero for the sake of having one, rather than if it was something that really suited her as a character. So Toa's whole deal is that she is the return of the villain turned cure. She is the younger sister of the prince side character that we'll talk about a little bit later, meaning that she is the one character of the season that is indeed a literal princess. Like, there's no extra veneer of being a princess pre-cure or a princess in training or someone trying to be a princess. She is just the literal princess of a magic land that we're trying to save this season. She's also the reason that whole land fell into despair. She was a very beloved figure by the people, and when she vanished, later revealed to be her essentially being kidnapped, the whole kingdom got pretty upset about it, leading to this slow, simmering despair throughout the people that built and built until it was enough for the big bad to make use of it. She initially went with the villain, Despair, because Despair told her she could help Toa achieve her dream. This led to Toa being kept and slowly brainwashed over a period of many years until she was a devoted servant of the big bad, acting as one of the villains in the first half of the season because of that. That all ties her pretty deeply into what's going on with this season. She's kind of an important figure. However, at the same time, it also feels like there's not that much there for her this season. For example, there's a lot about this season that's sort of set up to come in threes, which she throws a wrench into. I don't have a problem with there being a secret fourth transforming perfume that nobody knew about. That's whatever. What does feel odd to me is that we have the motif of strength, kindness, and beauty as the traits of a princess, with one being the standout of each of the first three leads. Where does that leave room for Toa to be a part of it? The answer is that she doesn't get to be a part of it. When she joins the group intro after becoming a cure, each of the three girls lists one trait, and then instead of all saying go at the end together, that moment is instead given to Toa. Toa gets go. It just makes it feel like while the season was planned to have 4 cures, it was set up like it was for 3. They never really considered the way they might have to make adjustments for that 4th character to be part of the group. She's also shortchanged to the other girls when it comes to the super side of things. While each of the core girls gets 3 elegant transformations to go with the 3 keys that they receive, Toa only ever gets 1. Sure, as a mid-season, maybe she doesn't really need all 3, but it does end up feeling a little like she's not getting quite as much attention as the other 3, you know? There's also the way that the other 3 girls do a trio attack all the time, and then Toa is doing her attack separate from them. I understand that she has a different magic attack item, but it is something that keeps her feeling separated from them until we get the late in the season super group attack with all 4. As a villain, Toa, then called Twilight, is an intimidating figure. She's focused on her mission, and it makes her a compelling mystery. You wonder what her deal is. Then she finds the 4th perfume and a set of keys, using it as a corrupted mockery of what the rest of the girls are doing. Oh, that's some impactful stuff right there. That's not something we usually get to see in Precure outside of a movie like with Yes 5 or a single episode instance like with Smile. The only time we've really seen something like that play out more fully is in Heart Catch with Dark Precure, a concept that always feels exciting and dramatic to try, though I do also respect the restraint to not come back to that well over and over again to lessen the impact of it. Twilight is presented as a sort of dark twist on the concept of a princess compared to what's going on with the main cast. Instead of following the values that the series mentions all the time as being core to being a princess, Twilight is presented as snobbish nobility, one that sees being a princess as being a right that you are born with, not something to strive for. All others are subjects that are meant to serve her ends, not subjects that she is meant to improve the lives of through benevolent governance. And for the princess-themed season, that dichotomy between the fairy tale ideal of a princess and the way a title can be twisted to selfish means is something that might have been interesting to play with. However, just as this really gets going, we're hit with the middle of the season, and it's time for Toa to be redeemed, reaching deep into her and that bond she shared with her brother in order to pull her out of the darkness that she's been steeped in. You see, my problem with Toa is I don't really have a super strong sense of exactly who she is and what it is that she's striving for, you know? She does have that problem that Ellen had back in Sweet. We got to know this character as a villain, and then she was purified. In doing that, she was essentially reset. Any development or ideology that we had seen out of her were villainous, and thus things she could not carry with her if she was going to be a cure. So nearly everything we had learned about her up to that point is just wiped away. What we know about her has to be what little we saw from flashbacks, and that amounts to a love of her brother and a love of the violin. The next handful of episodes is her having to do the obligatory song and dance for a villain turned cure, where she feels guilty about everything she's done. And while I understand that this is something that is important to do with the characters, this place of self-loathing that Toa is in does keep us from getting to know her a little. There are some hints about her there, but it doesn't feel like we're getting to know her, more processing what she's been through still. It is something that needs to happen, but when her personality is going through such a change, I would have liked if the episodes directly after showed us her character a little more, instead of her just kind of being ferried around by the other girls. The next few episodes after that do put some focus on Toa interacting with some other character, and sort of starting to bring her out of her shell since she had been sort of keeping to herself in the wake of her fresh redemption. These do work, but Toa has a little bit of a slow start compared to the other girls who we really got a sense of in their first episode. Part of that is that she's coming in the middle of the season and there's more to balance now, but I think part of that also just comes down to the way that Toa doesn't really have anything personally interesting going on. Each of the other girls have a clear dream and driving goal that is personal to them. Haruka wants to become a princess. Minami wants to be someone her family can rely on for most of the season. Kirita wants to become a model that can stand toe-to-toe with her mother and be a big presence on the stage. They all have something personal to them. However, with Toa, her goals are things that really align with the progression of the plot rather than being something truly personal to her. Her brother vanishes for a hot second, but finding him is a goal that everyone has. She might have a bit more of an emotional stake in it, but that reunion doesn't seem to be something that is personally driving her. Her big dream that she expresses is a desire to become a grand princess, but this doesn't seem to be something she has any real way of personally making progress towards herself. We're told that it's something that only a princess precure can become, and the fact that she was not a precure was why she was told she couldn't do it as a child. But even once she does become a cure, it's not as though she's trying to find out how to do this on her own or trying to get more information about it. She just kind of coasts along as everyone else makes progress, and when they have the big end of the season moment of protecting the dreams of others, that's the point where they all become grand princesses. It's not something that's really hers or that she strives for, it's an overall plot development. Late in the season, everyone gets a moment where they get to sort of reaffirm their commitment to something or solidify their feelings in order to activate a series of mini castles that correspond to each of them. Toa is the first one to do this. Her moment is seeing someone from her kingdom upset, and then remembering something she was told by her parents before she puts 10 toes down to say that the kingdom isn't dead because she's still here and she's going to work to bring it back. She beats the monster with her friends, plays violin with her brother like they used to in good times, and boom, the first of the 4 is unlocked and we've started into the final arc of the season. She makes her vow that she will restore her kingdom and everyone in it. And that's nice and all. I like that she's actively working towards restoring her homeland, much like Hime was in Happiness Charge. I just think it makes her less interesting as a character when everyone is also working towards that outcome with her, and it's plot related rather than a personal motivation. I mean, it is deeply personal to her because it is her homeland and all, but you get what I mean, right? It's not very individualized from the others and from the main thrust of the plot. That extra sentimental layer placed over her goals doesn't change the way that they're the shared ultimate goal of everyone with just a little spice sprinkled on top. I think there are elements of Toa that are interesting, and I can totally understand if someone really falls in love with her character, but that's just not where I'm at with her. I just find it a little hard to get attached when there are parts of her that feel like they're more of a plot vehicle than a character sometimes. I'm also troubled by some of the framing around her and how she is perceived as a princess of her land. It's outright stated that everyone in the kingdom loved her, and it was losing her that started the downward spiral of people's morale. Toa isn't someone who really had any political influence because she was just a child, and because of that, she was mostly just a figurehead as part of the family. That's fine, I don't expect them to hand the keys of the kingdom over to an 8-year-old. However, it does feel a little uncomfortable to me that she was so known to the people and she was so deeply beloved by them at that young age. She was a child. While it makes sense that the child of a beloved royal family would have attention put on them and be viewed favorably, the huge impact that her vanishing has implies to me that she was a huge facet of the lives of these people, that perhaps she was playing the figurehead role a little more than being a child. I admit that just might be me picking up more than the series was actually putting down, but I just got a weird vibe with how much the hope of the people hinged on this little girl. And I admit that I didn't even really think much about that until the 40th episode where her mini castle was restored, and it was because of what her mother said that I got a different vibe from things. We're shown in a flashback her parents telling her that when she smiles, the people smiles, and that if she looked worried, the people would worry too. To some extent, this is something that's true. The image that leadership projects can influence a populace. It's a kind of thing about how if you smile, you'll bring happiness to others around you. At the same time, though, it does feel like it's telling Toa to not let anything other than that happiness show. If she's feeling something different, would she be expected to plaster a smile over the top for the sake of others? Just how important is it for Toa to play this role, even as a child, rather than show how she truly is? Once again, I don't think it's what the series is actually trying to say here, but it is something you can interpret from it, and it does leave a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth if I let myself think about it too much. This is another season that I have to praise for having an excellent supporting cast, perhaps one of the best that we've had in the franchise up to this point. It's not a case where every single side character is going to come back and have some big role, but it's one where I get a real sense of the world around these girls. It's not just them and the magic beings that have a life that they're living. Many of the supporting characters have a semblance of life or interiority to them that makes the world feel more grounded and lived in. One thing in particular that stands out is the way that the classmates of the season really feel like they're characters again. This is something that sort of tends to fall by the wayside at times for this show. Perhaps there is one or two classmates with slightly elevated existence for a few episodes or an episode, but most of the time classmates are just there to fill out the classroom, not really be characters. Not so for this season. There are several classmates that might get a heightened relevance for a single episode, but those characters remain around and are characters that are interacted with over the course of the season, sticking out in your mind even if you might not necessarily remember their names. Like you have Reiko, who is in charge of the girls' dorm, who initially wants to get rid of the dog mascot, but then is brought around to letting her stay. She's serious and a little strict, but does care ultimately and is someone who is actively involved in the school community. Yuki was a childhood classmate of Haruka's, the very one who told her that she couldn't be a princess. However, he has his own big dreams to play tennis at a high level, something that Haruka ends up supporting him on 2 separate episodes that gives us a real sense of his competitive drive. And there are several more who are more minor but have memorable designs, like the student council members, so you have something of a sense for them when they do show up now and then. In fact, the whole school seems like a character. Early on in the season, there are moments where you will catch students talking to each other about Haruka and what she's been doing or who she's interacting with, because that catches people's eye. It gives you a real sense of how the student body as a whole is reacting to her and gives you an idea of what everyone around her thinks of what's going on. You get a sense of when actions have social results and just what the main thoughts of the student body are. These things make it all the more impactful when you have episodes that focus on the bond of that student body, like the one where they all work together on a really big snow castle, or at the end of the season when the girls are saving them directly, revealing who they are, and they give their support back to the girls. Those things wouldn't work or have the impact that they do in the story if not for the way that they've been set up for so long. Those story beats don't hit the same when the students spawn out of nowhere for them. The build-up has to be there, and in this season, it most certainly was. Not every episode is, nor should it be, focused on things related to the school, but by taking our main characters and placing them into a boarding school setting away from their families, these relationships with their peers become all the more important, and the season does portray that well. But that's not to say that the families of the girls are completely absent either, because they're not. In fact, because none of the girls are living at home when their families do come up, it's usually something that happens with some level of emphasis and serves a distinct story purpose. Haruka's family are certainly more working class than the others, but they're still pretty damn successful. It's clear that putting Haruka into this prestigious school is something that they have to consider and budget for, but it's also something that they have the means to do if they put that effort into it. Haruka's father makes an impression on the first episode by being very doting when he drops her off at school, and when he comes around for family day, we see that carry through, even if the episode is really more about Haruka's relationship with her little sister, someone who is feeling a little abandoned precisely because Haruka left to go to school far away from home. The family drama there is simple and somewhat predictable, but it's also well executed. There is value in doing basic things well, and that is something that we're able to see from this episode. With the focus the season has on dreams, it's good to see a supportive family with the shared dream of seeing one of their own thrive. It also does stand out a little that Haruka is the character with the most grounded and quote-unquote normal upbringing, since the rest of her friends do all come from families that have high positions. Minami's family is likely the one we see the most of, but like I've mentioned when talking about her, that's because they're quite tied into her storyline throughout the season. They're not a constant presence, but they're around enough that they're the ones we get the most feel for. They're your typical benevolent rich people, and like I said, they're another group where their support of their daughter is a real highlight. We really see more of Kirara's mother, as her father isn't much of a presence in the story, but we also see the relationship they have with each other in a decent amount of depth for the few times that she does show up. It does play in the comedic zone of Kirara being very responsible and her mother having her head in the clouds a bit, but this is something that twists when we see the way that her mother is keenly aware of the pressures that her daughter is under and is making a concerted effort to counterbalance those and distract her so she doesn't get in her own head. We see the way that even if she's often busy, she's often been a source of inspiration for Kirara, and in turn, the potential future of working alongside her daughter is an inspiration for her mother. It's a testament to how tight some of these episodes can be constructed that we can get all that from a character that has, overall, quite limited screen time. We don't get to see much of Towa's relationship with her parents outside of what I've already talked about and the way they're reunited at the end of the season, as they spend basically the entire thing sealed away and taken out of play. That's not a bad thing, since that is one of those elements that does lend a sense of stakes to the story, and unlike with Happiness Charge, we actually do see the reunion of this family as more than just a silent shot. The real familial connection that the season has for Towa is her brother, Kanata, and he's someone who is a full-on side character that we actually meet before her. Kanata is the prince of the season's obligatory magical kingdom What's in Danger, so we're introduced to him pretty early on as someone who is hanging out in the kingdom and trying to make some level of progress, limit damage, and gather information to try and fix everything. Mostly we see him in the form of a magical video call here or there to give a little information or encouragement to the girls when they're starting out on their journey. He also serves as something of a mysterious object of fascination to Haruka, as she pretty instantly recognizes him as the prince that gave her the first key when she was a child. It allows him to be something to sort of wonder about, since the first portion of the season keeps him at arm's length for the most part. Where he really starts to make a splash is in the traditional mid-season blowout, the one that we must overcome in order to make Towa a member of the team. Since he's not one of the main characters, he does spend most of his time on the sidelines being a support player in order to let the Curious get the spotlight and overcome the challenge of the episode. However, being Towa's brother, he's the one there that is lending emotional stakes and context to the need to not just defeat Towa, but instead free her from the grip of the big bad. He serves as the emotional anchor to the conflict, and we care more about setting Towa free because we can see just how much he cares about it, even if we don't know her outside of her villainous persona. and that is something that works pretty well. Her real identity is something that won't be much of a surprise if you're an adult that has seen this kind of story before, but like I've already said, there is value in doing a simple story well. At the end of the big conflict, he is the one that covers for the rest of the girls to escape. He stands between the bad guys and the way back home for the rest of them, maintaining a level of protection as the door closes so that the girls can all get away safely in a moment of self-sacrifice. It's a moment that speaks to his character and his priorities. Keep the girls safe because they have the means to keep up the fight even if he's gone, and are the best chance of protecting his sister just after getting her back. Now, despite this being a self-sacrifice, he does live through it. As much as I think there is interesting story potential in cutting Kanata off right there, that is not something that I would expect to see out of Precure. That's just not the kind of franchise this is. So instead, Kanata does end up on Earth in the care of a violin maker who is a minor character. Kanata has, in the time between his self-sacrifice and being found, lost all his memories, and while it is a relief to Toa that he is alive and well, there is a sting to the fact that he doesn't know who she is, continuing that rift between them when they had just found each other again. And this is a section of the plot that felt kind of off to me, and part of that might be because it was such a straightforward amnesia plot that I kept sitting there and waiting for the other shoe to drop. I kept waiting for some reveal that this wasn't actually Kanata, or that he had some other agenda, because something about him felt off in a way that was more than just because his memories were missing. I ended up being wrong on that front, and maybe it was me picking up weirdness that the show wasn't really putting down, but something about him felt a little strange for the entire experience. It also means that his longest continuous stretch of episodes isn't really Kanata, so to speak, because of how he's kind of a different character when he's lacking his memories. While I appreciate that this is something that lasts a while and his sacrifice wasn't entirely without consequence, it does mean that this is another case where we're not really getting to know him in this stretch, the one where, like I said, it is his most consistent presence. However, this is also he can serve that vital role in Haruka's story. Without his memories, Kanata is lacking an understanding of the importance of dreams, which means he doesn't realize the impact that he has as someone who gave Haruka the push she needed to keep dreaming as a child when he tells her that if a dream is hurting her, she should give it up. This is something that's pretty devastating to Haruka, and while he eventually comes around, it's worth remembering that by the time he does that, she doesn't need to be reliant on that support anymore, even if it's nice for him to apologize for what he said. In that moment, you can completely understand why he says it. Seeing her in pain as the result of being a Precure bothers him. And if seeing someone hurt bothers you, you're going to try and tell them to stop whatever it is they're doing. He does kind of have a point. But at the same time, Haruka knows what she's doing and has reasons to do this. There is more at stake than just her dreams alone. It is through this experience that he does end up getting his memories back, and at that point he sort of exits relevance. He exists generally as an ally that is off doing his own sort of thing again, just like before, there to do some extra bad guy cleanup in the endgame of the season, and not all that much else. It does not escape my notice that he is there mostly to play a part in some of the bigger moments of the season, rather than be a consistent character that's part of the team, and that's fine. There are plenty of others there to play a role of a more involved ally, and we don't need him to fit himself into that role. For example, we have Pafu and Aroma, the mascots of the season. So, for as much as I like Pafu, we can admit that she isn't adding a whole lot to the season outside of being cute. She is there to be cute and sell plushies based on how her big fluffy dog ears can be styled. She's a comedic sidekick to everything going on and not a character that's doing much or having a goal of her own. She is cute, I will give her that, sickeningly coated in sugar like a big cotton candy puff. There is some level of value for that for the right kind of person. However, I'm not someone who gets terribly attached to characters based on cuteness value alone. I completely understand why those who do love her are crazy about her. But for me, she mostly just kind of flew under the radar and was a generally pleasant presence. Aroma, meanwhile, has a little bit more going on, and I have to admit, I took a bit of a liking to him. I don't think he rises to being my favorite mascot character, but he's definitely high on the list for sure. He's a little guy that is just doing his best. Aroma is a little bird that wants to be a butler and is trying very hard. He's not some super strict character, but he does have a little bit of a focus on things being done right and things being just so. Mainly, though, he's trying to help the girls reach to where they need to be and guide them into doing well, as much as he can manage that anyway. Like Pafu, he doesn't get a whole lot of focus. After all, while he's in a lot of episodes, he's not super plot integral and is mostly there to add flavor to the roster. However, unlike Pafu, he does get an episode that is specifically focused on his dreams and ambitions and takes us a little more into his headspace. It's a well-done episode that gives us a sense of his character and allows him to go through a little arc to change and grow into a better butler. Basically, he has to realize that his job is to make the life of his master easier and more leisurely. While they may have things they need to get done, it's not his role to be a drill master to them. It's a nice episode that brings him to a more full understanding of what the real purpose of his job is and also makes it clear just how much he loves his work. It's not that much of a surprise that this is one of the few times that we see him take on human form as well, giving him more human features in order to make it easier to connect with his emotional journey. Then you have the sort of teacher mascot of the season, Miss Shamor. While she doesn't get a lot of screen time since she spends most of her time living in the item meant to give the girls princess lessons, I have to say I have something of a soft spot for her. When she is not a literal cat, she's an older woman that the girls can look up to and seek some level of guidance from. She's principled without being stuck up or strict. She's a patient teacher from what we can see. Like, she's perfectly happy to point out where the girls might have failed, but that does not mean that she's given up on them either. She points out those shortcomings so that they can learn from them. She's definitely a character that is mostly there for the sake of function and to help the girls learn new things, but that's not something that's altogether bad, and I think she adds some flavor to the cast. There is one more fairy-type character, but we'll talk more about him a little later. And then there is one more side character that I've kind of neglected to mention until now, despite her being one of the best of the bunch. Yui. We meet Yui in the first episode of the series as she's going to be Haruka's roommate at school. You would expect the show to room her with another cure, but no, she gets Yui instead, and the two become besties pretty quickly. From the jump, you kind of realize that she's there to be the character we have to excuse ourselves from, and the one we have to hide things from, the one that is the closest to finding out about the truth at any given moment. However, just like last season, that's not something that lasts, and she ends up becoming this season's civilian ally. She doesn't find out basically right away like Seiji did last season. They hold back for a while this time and let things simmer. But she's all the better for finding out since she gets very integrated into everything going on. She's not trying to go toe-to-toe with the villains or anything, but she is decisively part of the friend group and spends a lot of time with the rest of the cast. There are some things that it does feel like she's a little left out of, like the princess lessons, but she is otherwise on pretty equal footing with them in the slice of life aspect of the show. And she does what she can to make herself useful to the team, taking up the crowd control role and doing what she can from a civilian level. She's very sweet and does feel like she rounds out the friend group. She's even pretty quick to connect with Toa on some level without even having been part of the whole adventure to free her. Yui is also one of the first people that we get to see put into danger, taking advantage of her dream to be a children's book author. We then see her get put into danger several more times over the course of the season, to the point where it almost feels a bit like a running gag how often she's overtaken by the villains. True, this is because she is a character that is there and often convenient to use for an attack rather than inventing someone new for every episode, but it does serve a purpose. As a quieter and more sensitive character, I think it's easy to say that Yui makes for someone who is well suited to be a victim of the villains, especially since she doesn't have the magical means to protect herself like all her friends do. She's just a girl, not some magical fighter, which makes it stand out when she starts trying to resist on her own and growing that inner strength to try and defend her own dreams. Each time that she is overtaken, she learns from it, and bit by bit, she starts putting up a fight. She's not terribly successful, but she does start being able to push back at least a little bit, even if she doesn't get to the point of completely freeing herself. Well, that is until the end of the season, when all her classmates are overcome at once, and she stands out as the sole character that's able to free herself. While the rest of the girls are trying to deal with everything else that's going on, Yui starts trying to get her classmates free all on her own, and it stands out as a great character moment that all her growth and development of self-confidence has led to. It's something that was a simmering background element for the whole season, and it finally pays off really nicely. Late in the season, you're sitting there like, come on, you can do it, sweetie, and when she finally does, it's awesome. I have seen some people be upset that Yui didn't end up getting to become a cure, and while to some extent, I can understand that. She's a very lovable character, and you want to see good things for the characters you like. I also don't think she needs to become a cure for her story and what she does to have value. I think that with a little more fleshing out, she might have been a stronger mid-season cure than Toa was for me after her redemption, but I also think it can be sometimes good for us to have girls who are not magically blessed and are still valuable members of the team and show bravery in their own way. Of course, the season has villains. All seasons must. And while there are some that fall short, there are some that I find genuinely entertaining, or at the very least are making strong choices that make them memorable and interesting enough to keep having around. Despair is our biggest bad of the season, and she's okay. I think that it's just a curse of the biggest bad that they can never be the most interesting part of a Precure season's villain lineup, because that would require them to be somehow involved in everything that's going on in the season. The structure of a Precure season generally doesn't let these big overlords get that involved outside of the most key moments, keeping them in enough shadow that they feel like a distant threat, so they don't get the chance to have interesting interactions or ideology, since there's some generic evil to fight most of the time. They exist to be defeated and little else. I will grant her that her manipulation in the middle of the season does keep her a little bit interesting for a moment, but after that she immediately leaves and puts someone else temporarily in charge, which takes the wind right out of her sails for the second half of the season. At least she has an absolute killer design going for her. And I'm not just saying that she has this killer design because I think she looks cool. That design is important. Because she is this looming figure that is often off in the distance, we don't really know her all that well. So her design and the animation of that design does a lot to carry the intimidation factor that this character has. There are moments where she doesn't do all that much, but the moments that she does get directly involved feel more impactful because of the way that she is animated and because of the way that she is depicted and the way that colors shift when she is around. It sells that there is this sense of power to her, even if we don't see her utilizing that power as much as some of the other characters. And it is important that she have that sense of presence and power, even if there's really not actually all that much to her, because that's what's going to sell us on the fact that she was able to hold Toa down for so long. Stop and Freeze are two baddies that are introduced pretty late in the season, and they are mostly there to be a level of competence up from what we've been seeing so far, being a double act that is quite robotic and thus do the mission without any emotional interference. And they work well for that purpose, but without having any actual personality, they get boring rather quickly. They're fine for what they are, but they're repetitive, and there is a stretch of the season that uses them quite consistently as the villains for the episodes that might have been a little better without them. The idea of their stronger efficiency wears off after the third or so time that they get defeated. Shut is where things actually get interesting, though. He's a flamboyant dandy that is fun to watch from the moment he shows up on your screen for the first time. He is just an altogether good time, no matter what he's doing, getting upset over tiny things and expressing himself so exuberantly that you can't help but like him a little bit, even if he's actually a bad guy, you know? In the first half of the season, we get to see that he has an absolutely huge admiration of Toa when she is Twilight, thinking her to be the perfect princess and being quite devoted to her. Then, when she is purified and joins the good side, they naturally follow through on that by having him not take it well at all and holding a personal grudge against her for moving on and changing her direction. He can't understand why she would do that, and moreover is completely incapable of accepting it. At first, he tries to draw her back in, but when it's clear that won't work, she becomes a personal target of his ire, leading into a sort of one-sided rivalry on his end. Later on still, near the end of the season, after being sort of kicked around the hierarchy due to shifts in the villain team over the course of the season, Shut ends up on the outs and down on his luck. It's at this point that a hand is reached out to him one more time, a chance to walk away from the system that he's spent the entire season trapped in. One thing that is brilliant here is that while he is definitely on the outs from the villain team, heroism isn't something he's ready for either. So he slaps the hand away and just walks off on his own. And while that stings and might feel disappointing, it also feels like a natural development for him. He's not a good guy and can't bring himself to see himself as one. You can't make someone be good, and you can't help someone who refuses to be helped. All you can do is leave that door open and hope for the best. Of course, because this is Precure, he does eventually come around in the endgame of the season. Not exactly becoming a good guy entirely, but helping out enough to basically be a reluctant ally, and that feels like a pretty good place to put him in. No longer antagonistic, but not quite fully there on the path to being better either. He ends the season powerless, and it seems like he might just be making some new connections that are going to allow him to walk a smoother road, which is the best we can hope for him. I like to think he found himself out there. But the reason that Shut is getting kicked up and down the power ladder the whole season is because there is more internal turmoil in the villain scene than we've ever really seen before. It's not like this is unheard of in Precure, but it usually comes in the form of some underlings jockeying with each other in order to try and get more footing and keep themselves relevant to the big bad. One might backstab another or step on them on the way up, that sort of thing. This is the first time we've had those underlings try to vie to take the head villain role for themselves, which I think is a lot of fun. It makes it feel like all these characters are a little power hungry and want more from themselves rather than being completely devoted to the main villain of the season like we often see. Locke is the one we see this with first, even if I find myself not all that personally interested in him outside of that element. Early in the season, Locke is playing in the realm of being the sort of evil child archetype, coming off as an annoying younger brother that is more effective than Shut, but not exactly infallible either. He's fine, but I personally ended up favoring Shut of the two since his flamboyance made him a little more fun and to my tastes. Locke actually becomes interesting after the mid-season blowout. Remember how I said that Despair goes away for a while? Well, when that happens, she leaves Locke in charge and makes him collect what she needs to restore herself. Locke does do this, but at the same time, he is clearly reveling in the new power he has and running his own scheme at the same time. He gets a redesign that makes him look older and bolder and puts into motion a plan that makes it seem like there's nothing the girls can do to stop him. They need those magic keys in order to transform, right? Well, what if someone took them? That's exactly what Locke does, and it makes him suddenly feel like a huge threat because, yeah, separating the girls from their means to transform is something that any villain is technically capable of doing at any time, but it's not something that most do. Genre convention is just that this is a sort of plan that we tend not to consider or even talk about, because if our heroines can't fight, it's a little more complicated to have them do their usual battle thing. So when things like this are done, it's usually something that only lasts for a minute or two at the most. But no, this is his whole plan, and it makes him feel dangerous because he is crossing that unmentioned threshold. He drains power from the keys enough that he could restore Despair, but then crucially makes the choice not to. Why do that when he can selfishly use that power for himself? It's another bold choice that makes him feel like he's breaking with formula. Of course, because this is Precure, this isn't something that can be allowed to go on forever, so he is eventually fought and defeated, and not even turning into a giant frog is going to do much for him, and it's at that point that I kind of lost interest in him again. For you see, it is revealed that Locke is actually a little mascot cat fairy from the kingdom that was corrupted and made to do bad things by an evil sentient hoodie. So I guess the hoodie itself is Locke, and what we bring home with us after the purification is Kuroro, who I didn't bring up in the side character section because he's barely one. At first, it seems like he's going to be part of the cast now like the others, but there's really nothing that's done. He's shy and quiet, so even when we have an episode that assures him everything is okay, he rarely makes appearances, and when he does, it's mostly just quietly off to the side or in the background. He just lacks any real sense of impact, and it feels like he's mostly there to bloat the cast rather than contribute to it. Evil Sweater Locke ended up popping up in the season endgame, getting actual purified, and the two of them reunite to do their thing for good this time, and I could see that really hitting if I had cared about Kuroro at all, but I just didn't, so it didn't hit for me the way I think the writers wanted it to. Close is the villain that we start and end the season with. At first, he seems like our introductory villain, meant to be dealt with and discarded early in the season as the tutorial level for our girls. At first, that is what he is. In fact, he completely exits relevance once the girls get their first power-up, as though he was just the boss fight at the end of the tutorial. He gets the whole, "this is your last chance, don't disappoint me" song and dance, and he's then gone. You have no reason to think he'll be back. And then he does come back. 20 episodes later. At that point, you could be forgiven for thinking that he wasn't going to return at all, but no, here he is, back and better than ever. After Locke's failed attempt at a coup, it is Close that comes back and actually uses what he had collected to restore Despair. He comes back rocking a new look that makes him seem more serious before, has a more serious attitude, and is flanked by Stop and Freeze, something that implies he's found a new level of power if he's able to have underlings for him instead of being that bottom rung on the ladder. He starts enacting a new plan where each attack is a way to cover for laying down some long-term goals by planting evil seeds all over the place. This culminates a handful of episodes before the seasonal endgame actually kicks into gear and provides the backdrop for when Haruka loses and then regains faith in herself. A peak of villainy happening in parallel to the peak of her emotions. Nicely done. At the very end of the season, he is subsumed into the big bad as part of her final gambit, and it seems like that's going to be the end of him. But the very final battle has him stepping up again and taking on a role as the final obstacle to be defeated. After Despair is defeated, he emerges, and he and Haruka do a one-on-one, and it's clear that they're evenly matched, because they are existing as two sides of something that is a cycle. Hope cannot exist without a despair to overcome, and despair cannot exist without being the result of hope lost. They can go round and round and round again, but there's never going to be one that completely overtakes the other. They both realize this and come to an understanding. He leaves with the promise that he will be back again, because that is the nature of their conflict, and that's something that Haruka accepts. And I think that conclusion works because it is clothes that they use for it. He's a character that we have seen have a cycle of death and rebirth within the season itself, so we get a sense that he has an understanding for how these things cycle around, and he has had experiences where he is the one to lose, and experiences where he's momentarily the one coming out on top. He's seen this play out in miniature so many times, he can extrapolate the way it works in a wider sense. That's something you can't really do with Despair, a character who doesn't have that sense of cycle or the wider picture, since she's meant to be a wall of intimidation that doesn't back down and doesn't have much of a personality. Close has that perspective, and we have seen him go through changes and phases over the course of the season, so he seems more capable of coming to an understanding, an agreement, or changing his mind. In something like Doki Doki, it felt a little cheap for an underling to sort of spring up out of nowhere in the final episode after the big bad had been defeated, like something that happened just for the sake of a fight being in the final episode and not much else. Here, though, it feels appropriate, and the framing allows it to make sense for this character, expanding what he can mean and our understanding of him in his final moments. The action this season is stellar. Precure has a habit of always kind of surprising you a little with how much it's able to pull off, but this season starts off strong and doesn't really let up. Haruka's first fight is a sight to behold, and it would not surprise me if that scene alone was something that spurred a lot of people to take interest in the series. It's exceedingly well handled in the way that it makes the action clear and readable while providing a real sense of impact to everything she does. Every hit has force behind it, and every action has weight. It's incredible. One of the things that this scene is actually perfect to talk about is the way that the season is good at making use of these moments of holding and snapping tension. What I mean by this is that second where everything feels somewhat still in order to build up that tension, only for it to release in a sudden shot of motion that makes it feel faster because it is coming from that moment of stillness. Like, take a look at this. Before Haruka makes her first big move to save a flower that is about to get stepped on, for half a second we hold on that shot of her foot, gathering up that force to launch, and then it moves, and the next thing we see is her flying through the air, showing us just how rapidly she's propelled herself and giving the impression that this is more than just a girl jumping normally. She slams her hands into the monster of the week, and instead of following it through with the momentum, we see her linger in the air as the monster is thrown back. She hits with shocking force. We get a sense for that before anyone comments on just how much power this girl has. A bit after that, we get the moment where she runs, and this alone is a stellarly animated shot, combining a lot of different elements without missing a beat to give us a real sense of the forward energy as she moves in. When she jumps up, there is a half beat where she is spinning in the air, building that tension for when she comes down with the kick. When she hits this time, we once again have that moment of semi-stillness as we see her make impact and shatter the paint palette. They are moving apart, but with how small they are on the screen, it doesn't feel like quite as much motion. The impact is sold by that sudden rush of flower petals that comes up. That's our tension release here. Later, when she's trapped in the mouth of the monster, we have that moment of tension where we hold on her like she's being squeezed, which is released when she pushes out and escapes. There are plenty more that I could point out, but I'm not going to go over every single second of this fight. Just go watch it. This is a pretty common technique in anime and animation in general, but I wanted to point it out since it's being done really well to sell the impact of the blows coming from both sides in this fight. This scene really sold me on the season being an action powerhouse, and while we run the usual gambit of some episodes that have to keep things a little more simple to conserve energy and others where they were really able to go all out, they always know where those money shots needed to be and what moments needed that impact and emphasis to really sell things. What moments needed to be highlighted to sell the emotions, and the times where we could maybe hold back a bit. And one thing that feels really important to stress is that at every chance it gets, at every turn, the animation really sells the sense of power that these girls have. From the moment that each of them show up, they are displaying intense feats of strength and powerful magic and doing all sorts of incredible stuff, which makes them feel incredibly strong. And that's something that sometimes happens in Precure, and then in the next episode, they'll be getting tossed around like rag dolls. But it really feels like there was an attention to the fact that these girls were powerful in this season, which I really appreciated. When they are thrown around, it's not a case of that they're suddenly weak, it's just that they're facing a powerful enemy, or that there was something that caught them off guard, or something of that nature. It doesn't feel like they have been arbitrarily powered down just so that they can have that low moment. There are so many moments where they feel like they are these intensely powerful heroes, and that is important. There is some good stuff in the season when it comes to the action, and while that might not be the only thing I come to Precure for, you can bet it's something that can boost something that is already enjoyable to even greater heights. However, there are also some choices made that just don't suit my tastes. This is something that is subjective, obviously, but it's not a direction that I would have taken for this. That is that many of the special attacks this season are done using 3D animation. Now, don't get me wrong, all animation is hard work, and I have appreciation for all animation forms, but I don't think that was the right choice for Precure to be making here. I do not expect that the series will exist without any 3D animation at all. There are some things that work better if you use 3D, and that can be something that enhances scenes. There are reasons to choose 3D over 2D and reasons to choose 2D over 3D. I recognize that these special attacks are something that take a lot of work and polish to make look just right. My quibble is that it's worth putting in that extra work and polish to do that in 2D, since these are scenes that are gonna get used over and over again. Sometimes using 3D can be the easier choice, and I'm understanding of that, but I find it a little harder to justify using something 3D that you would normally do in 2D when that is footage that you're going to repeat multiple times during the show. It is very well done 3D animation, it is, but the shift is still noticeable, and as a result, it takes me out each and every time that it does happen. I've never been fond of the magic items being rendered in 3D either, but seeing the girls in 3D just feels out of place after seeing them in 2D rest of the time. And perhaps this wouldn't bother me if not for the fact that some of the attacks are animated in 2D, so I can't help but wonder what led to that bizarre mishmash happening. This isn't a case of it being thing bad, but more thing and not to my personal preference, but it's something that I couldn't go on without bringing up. And it's not like those stock attacks are without things I like. Personally, I love the little detail that when Toa uses one of her big solo attacks, we see the lace that shows up on borders throughout the season serve a new purpose as a summoning circle. I like the way that Haruka's flower petals gathered in her hands look like a bouquet. I like that when the trio attack is used, their ribbons turn into the crown emblem of the season. There are good details mixed in there that I do appreciate. And another thing I want to comment on real quick, since it won't fit anywhere else in this video, is that this season is extremely good at making use of montage to show time passing with progression. Early in the season, there are multiple moments where we get a montage of the girls doing an activity or trying to pick up a new skill, but the way it's done, it doesn't feel like we're just hand-waving over what they're doing. It effectively shows it to us without having to show us every little detail. When Minami is helping Haruka to learn ballet, the montage does make it feel like we're seeing a lot of that effort that's being put in rather than just pushing past it to get on with the rest of the episode, and I think that's commendable. Once upon a time, there was a show called Revolutionary Girl Utena. Utena was and remains extremely influential in the world of anime and animation in general, despite the fact that the show can be very esoteric. Utena takes the world of a high school and mixes it with surrealism, theatricality, and heightened emotion to depict the journey of its cast in ways that can, at times, feel dreamlike or bizarre upon first viewing. There is a reason for all this, and the show certainly has a lot of meaning that it wants to get across in the story that it's telling, but Utena as a series does not give up its meaning easily. It makes you work for it, sit down, and look closely at what it's trying to say. It's not a series that will be for everyone, be it by the nature of how it tells its story or the fact that there is some incredibly dark content in the series that some are not comfortable sitting with. Utena is about coming of age, maturing, and growing up. It's about how women are put into specific categories depending on their actions, categories that not only lead to them being demonized or praised depending on where they fall, but are used to only further restrict or prescribe their behavior, creating a narrow field of womanhood. It's about how the archetypes of stories can be used against us when they start telling us who belongs where. It's about cycles and the breaking of them. It's about familial abuse, dangerous power dynamics, and the men who will take advantage of them. It's about love and pain. It's about a lot. It's about a lot of things that Precure would never come close to touching with a 60-foot pole. So why am I talking about it in a video about a season of Precure? Because it's pretty damn obvious, to me at least, that this is a season that was worked on in part by those who had seen Utena and wanted to make some deliberate references to it. The motif of spinning roses upon important story beats is something that is a trademark of Utena across the entire series. Go Princess's implementation might not do the exact same, but the season regularly uses lacy borders to make frames at highlighted moments in what is a clear allusion to Utena. Additionally, the character of Prince Kanata very obviously shares a color palette with Prince Dios of Utena on top of them both being princes. Heck, Utena and Haruka have the same backstory if you simplify things down. When they were a child, they had a chance encounter with a prince who, upon seeing their sadness, gave them a small gift. That gift ended up being the key to something larger than they ever realized and set their life down a different path in their teenage years. The drastic difference being the role the prince would go on to play and the way they responded to that moment in their perception of princes and princesses. And then, of course, you have the superficial similarities, like the fact that this is the first Precure season to have the girls at a boarding school, something that was a feature of Otori Academy as well, or the teacher who has a quite similar design to the one that showed up in Utena. Like, these aren't something that has a real thematic impact, but it certainly does feel like a nod to Utena, you know? And here's the thing. Utena released in 1997. Go Princess Precure came out in 2015. That's about 18 years of difference. It's entirely possible there were artists on the staff of this season of Precure that somewhat grew up with Utena or were even inspired to go into animation by it. It's a series that has certainly left an impact on a lot of artists the way it's been referenced over the years. These similarities are not something that happens on accident. They were done on purpose. Which is really odd because you would think the reason for doing that would be to place Go Princess in conversation with Utena, to serve as a thematic refutation of Utena's story ideas or something of that nature. However, Go Princess doesn't seem to be interested in a kind of conversation at all. Like, on one hand, that's good. Precure is made for an audience far too young to be engaging with Utena, yet, on the other, it is a little disappointing. At the end of the original series of Utena, the conclusion is that the categories of witch and princess are reductive archetypes to put into. Utena's attempt to break free of that is to take on the role of the prince so she can protect Anthe, who has simultaneously been unfairly put into both roles. However, grabbing a different fairy tale archetype isn't something that actually fixes the problem, because princes too are a role that does not give freedom and can be so easily corrupted when idealism fails. The real chance to revolutionize is to break from the cycle and those roles entirely, which is why Anthe leaves the school at the end of the series, stepping away from those definitions. Well, that's at least one interpretation. Utena is full of layers of symbolism and metaphor, and even though I've watched it twice now, once as a young college student and just last year as a grown woman, there is still a lot I don't feel quite smart enough to wring out of it. In contrast, Go Princess doesn't engage with that framework, despite lifting visual cues from it. Go Princess is content to sit within that princess frame, and most pressing on the edges of it to widen what the idea of a princess is a little bit. It's not a bad thing entirely to tell a story like that, to be clear, even if it can feel like the whole reason they're doing that is because the goal is to sell merch, and you can't sell little girls' princess merch if you're telling them the concept of the princess is a reductive role. It frustrates me to see something so visually tie itself to a story that is engaging with fairy tale archetypes and questioning them, and then ultimately do nothing to push back on them itself, and seemingly not have much of an intention to do so. There is a little bit of a question of what is a princess, but there is never a question as to if it is a good thing to aspire to be one, because that aspiration being a good thing is simply taken as a given. And I would not feel the need to sit here and question that connection if not for the way that the visual references are so numerous. I don't feel the need to draw that connection as much with something like Steven Universe, because the visual references to Utena are contained mostly to one scene and are referencing some of the more striking and memorable visuals of the action. It's a brief Easter egg and an homage, rather than lifting the color design of a character in a similar role, a backstory, and visual elements that are spread over the entire season. I was initially going to talk briefly about this as my intro to the video, a little bit of an attention grabber perhaps, but an hour and a half and 1,200 words later, I still didn't entirely know what I was trying to say about it. I had mixed feelings, and it was hard to put them into words. Perhaps there was some attempt in there to be in conversation with Utena, and in the 50 episodes it just gets buried a little in everything else the series has going on, but I can't know that for sure. It felt a little unfair of me to be focusing so much on a series that wasn't even what this show was about, but the references and the visual callbacks were so strong, and I noticed them so immediately in just the first episode that it felt odd to not talk about it at least a little, you know? So yeah, I think that some of these elements ring hollow, and I wish there was a little more into looking into the idea of what a princess is and how we can embrace or reject archetypes. But this is a show for little kids. So am I just expecting too much? I don't know, and that's something I'm going to have to sit with for a while. What became clear to me, though, is that Utena was something that could not go unacknowledged when looking at the series. I don't want to use it as framework to look at the entire thing, because beyond that, there are so many interesting things that the series has going on. I wanted to look at it on its own merits and see what it had to offer itself, but we had to at least talk about the elephant in the room. Creatives getting inspired by other creatives is sometimes a little bit messy like that. Okay, so this time in movie is a little weirdly handled, and I think that is perhaps the most interesting thing about it. Like, by this point, we know that the Precure movies have a pretty standard formula. Outside of a rare exception, the way a Precure movie usually runs is by introducing a new character and land separate from the main continuity so that we can go on an adventure that won't risk having any impact on the main plot. The most notable exceptions being Sweet for using the regular kingdom of the season and slotting itself into the main plot kind of messily, and Heartcatch, where the only difference is that instead of a new magical realm, we just used real-world Paris. This time, the movie is Go Princess Pretty Cure, Go Go Gorgeous Triple Feature, and the shakeup is that there are 3 different segments in the movie of varying length, each themed around Halloween, so you get a 3-in-1 experience. I can see the thought behind this and the way that they were sort of experimenting with the formula in a variety of ways, but I do think this leaves everything feeling weaker overall. Before getting into the movie, we do, of course, have to talk about the Miracle Light intro, and this time there basically isn't one. They just say, okay, get ready to use those lights and don't swing them around too much, and that's it. It seems like they already expect you to know what the Miracle Light is, how it's used, and the do's and don'ts before even beginning. I can respect keeping things brief and to the point, but this is perhaps far too brief when addressing an audience of young children. This is going to be the first time that we place it into the D tier for not really being a Miracle Light intro at all. Each of our segments is introduced by Pafu and Aroma, the first segment being Cure Flora and the Mischievous Mirror. It's only 5 minutes long, and if you told me this was a short played before the film in theaters, I would completely believe you. It's a 3D animated short where Haruka, as Flora, messes around with a mirror, but it turns out to be some ghosts and a sheet of glass rather than an actual mirror. Whoa! The two experiments here are clearly in working in the chibi-style CG animation, which is a new thing to see out of Precure, and the fact that this is a short told without any dialogue at all. I think the art style is cute and all, but I also think this is something that would have been better served as a pre-movie animated short and not actually part of the movie, since it's cute, but it doesn't feel like anything but light fluff. The next segment, The Pumpkin Kingdom's Treasure, occupies most of the runtime of the movie, lasting for about 50 minutes, and this is where we see the usual shape of a Precure movie. The girls get transported to a pumpkin kingdom where there's a new bad guy to defeat, a villain who is an advisor to the king and queen and has transformed the land into a place that is money hungry, focused on selling pumpkin pudding above all else to collect up finery and riches. All this while the forgotten pumpkin princess daughter is trapped in a high tower, dreaming that things will change. What we have here is pretty thin and straightforward, the complication that eats up a lot of runtime being that there is a princess competition to find a replacement for the forgotten pumpkin princess, something that our Precure girls end up getting roped into participating in. And because of that, I do get the impression that this was perhaps the intended movie, and then they made the other segments to fill up time because it didn't feel like it was substantial enough to put out as a movie on its own. Like, everything for a typical Precure movie is here, it just ends up feeling like it's dragging a little, despite how it's shorter than a usual Precure film. Adding anything more to it would have just increased that feeling of drag and led to an overall worse product. And when this is a season that is already underperforming compared to the last handful, well, you might as well experiment a little, right? I think part of the reason why this movie doesn't feel like it's got a lot to it is that the new character that seems like she's meant to be the new friend of the movie, Princess Pumpalulu, doesn't have any direct communication or interaction with the main cast until near the end of the movie. There's a point where she and Haruka get to exchange information via the mascots playing telephone for them, but that's about all there is, compared to how this sort of character is usually a companion through the movie. Usually these characters, even if they're just along for the ride, feel more like part of the movie because they have a bit more presence. Pumpalulu doesn't get that. She doesn't really feel like a character and more like a cute design that has had a sad backstory attached to it, since we don't see that much of her either. It makes it a little harder to get invested in her story when she spends most of the movie at arm's length, you know? You can feel the padding in the way that they separated the Precure girls and handled that. Haruka is free on her own and transforms, and after that it's revealed of the other three girls, Toa is the only one that managed to hold on to her transformation item, and that allowed her to escape, but not the others. She also gets a solo transformation sequence, only for the two of them to basically get immediately captured and not do anything, even though it seemed like they were setting up for a duo moment. It's not until the other two eventually get free that they are also able to transform. Sure, this shows how Toa already had a bad vibe about this guy and made sure to prepare herself for the fight that she was pretty sure was coming, but you can also see how this allows them to have 3 transformations when they had a group one earlier in the segment already as well, making it a total of 4. In a normal Precure movie, that doesn't feel like as much of a time waste since we have the full movie, but doing it in something that is 25 minutes shorter than usual makes it feel like it was done for padding, because we should theoretically not be doing something like that when we have less time than usual. The villain also isn't very interesting, just a stock standard cackling bad guy with a mild gem and mirrors vibe to him, and then he turns into a big monster. The shots of him absolutely wrecking the land after he goes full monster really land, but outside of that he's pretty whatever, and the monster side of him is dealt with quite quickly, so you don't really get that sense of a threat off of him. He had this cool concept of a crystal or glass book that I really liked the look of, but it's not something that comes up much and feels more like it was thrown in for visual flair and intrigue rather than being thematically or story relevant. And of course there is the movie transformation, because that's pretty standard at this point. It's barely around for more than a minute or two and doesn't have any sort of special impact. There is one moment that hits emotionally though. When Pumpalulu's parents see her for the first time since being controlled and recognize her, they start running towards her. As they do, they throw off the jewels and finery that is weighing them down and keeping them from getting to her faster. It's a lovely little moment that does show how she is their treasure over anything they might have gained materially. It's a little heavy-handed with the way they say something to spell that out, but it's a kids' movie, I'll allow it. The third segment of the movie is Precure and Leffy's Wonder Night. While also 3D animated, I appreciate that it was a different style than we saw in the first shot of the movie, allowing it to feel more distinct. It's actually in the style of the ending theme of the season, which has a kind of airbrushed quality to the coloring I've always liked. It's also very facially expressive, which was a help to this. In this, Pumpalulu's doll from the last segment is living on Haruka's desk in her dorm room after she was given it. Well, a little magic happens, and she gets sucked into the doll's magical world where the daylight has been stolen away by a pumpkin-headed fellow called Night Pumpkin. Leffy needs their help to get a miracle light to the top of the castle in order to let it shine and fix everything. The animation here is very energetic, and there are some parts where they clearly created spaces purely to have brief, cool action moments there, like the room where the floor is all iced over like an ice rink. It's clear that a lot of work went into getting this just right, and I think it makes for a pretty energetic and entertaining ride, helped by it being only 20 minutes long, meaning that a lot of the fat has to be trimmed. That does mean that the first act is so cut down to being nearly non-existent, and getting started does feel a little choppy, but once we've gotten going, it's a roller coaster ride, and feels like we're doing a speed run of the typical Precure movie formula. Leffy herself is a quickly endearing character that isn't super unique, but makes enough of an impression that you want to see her succeed. She stands out more than Pumpalulu did in her segment's shorter runtime at least, and she does have a design that's absolutely adorable. What stands out most, though, is that Leffy is allowed to have the big hero moment of slamming the light into place all on her own, even if the other girls are fending off the villain to keep him from catching her. She's the one that gets to fix everything, which I appreciated, since this franchise can sometimes have a habit of needing everyone to be involved in a big moment, or handing that moment off to the lead cure rather than a character that might have a little more emotional impact. Leffy gets to have that to herself, and instead Haruka gets a moment of fighting the big bad with the theme song playing instead, which is also a fun time. The segment is just plain enjoyable, and it's a nice touch that because the art style matches, the end of it just rolls right into the usual ending credits to cap off the movie. However, there is one thing I find disappointing here, and that is just how much emphasis is placed on miracle lights in this movie. If you have watched some of my content about other seasons or about the crossover movies, you'll know that I tend not to be a very big fan of the miracle lights. A large part of that stems from the fact that there's something of a fix everything button in a way that feels jarring if you're not having that theater experience with others and aren't, a child who actually thinks they're helping their favorite character. The other part is that the moments where it's done in the movie often feel very fourth wall breaking in a way that I personally don't care for when it's not an otherwise normal thing for the franchise. It feels odd for the movie to suddenly look into the camera and tell me it's time to help everybody. And I recognize that that's almost entirely a me thing. There are people who this will not bother nearly as much, and I usually try and grit my teeth and not talk about it too much unless there is more of a problem than usual. The case here is that since there's 3 shorts, there's 3 times as much miracle light usage. The third Leffy short doesn't so much have a miracle light moment, but more it revolves around the miracle light as the magical MacGuffin that we need to use to save the day, and I could get behind that if it didn't look like a cheap plastic toy in the movie. I get that you don't want it to look drastically different than the ones the kids in the audience are literally holding in their hand at that very moment, but it does end up taking me out of the movie a bit to see that. The main segment of the movie uses the miracle lights in the typical way that we see from these things, giving the girls a big power-up that they'll use to fix everything and make their big attack. It's standard, so I won't really complain about spending 30 seconds watching everyone tell the Precure that they can do it. It was in the first segment of the movie with Haruka and the ghost that this actually had me laugh and then roll my eyes. There's a part where you're meant to swing the lights around while she's jumping in order to help her transform into different outfits, and honestly, the little indicators they put at the bottom made it look like it was footage from a reused Wii game. A gentle reminder that when I am looking at these items, I am 90% looking at them in terms of how they function as a plot and element of the show, rather than the toys they were in the real world. Years down the line, the toys will no longer be available for sale, so these items still need to be able to be in the show without feeling like they're a blatant toy commercial for something that no longer exists. The Princess perfume is our transformation item in the season, and I personally find it very funny that 2 of the best seasons share a perfume-themed transformation item. Unlike Heartcatch, though, this item does not get a lot of screen time this season. In fact, it's something that the season barely pays any real attention to. The trinkets that go with it are given far higher prominence this time around. This thing doesn't have any alternative uses. It's just there for transformation and an early season attack, and that's all. It doesn't really even have a gimmick to it either, like the swappable dressing up cards of last season. It's very straightforward. It's cute, though it seems a little clunky to me, and I think that's just because it's a little bit bigger than it should be because it's matching expected toy size. The real star of the show are the dress-up keys, little dress-shaped trinkets that reveal a key segment when you slide down a tab in their back. At the start of the series, the characters are tasked with collecting 12 of these. Well, they do that partway through the season, but it turns out that some of the keys, the ones belonging to Toa when she joins the team, don't actually count for an arbitrary reason, so that the plot can't quite wrap up yet. There end up being 18 keys in total by the end of the season, with a bonus one if you count the movie's extra key. These are going to be your catch-all for doing anything magical, as they're the way all the other fancy toys get activated. Need to transform? Slap a key in the perfume. Need to do an attack? Slap a key in the perfume or your wand. Need a group finisher? Slam 4 keys down in that plastic castle. They're very straightforward in what they do. Not entirely a bad thing, though. I also think that in terms of little magic trinkets to be collected, these are far from the worst that we've had. Every single one of them serves some kind of purpose, and while there are a lot of them, there's not so many that it feels like an overwhelming number of them. They all fit on the fancy princess keychain. Many of them also feel like they're actually earned in some way rather than being a random trinket given for winning a single fight. And despite how much I don't really talk about these things in terms of toys, I do actually think these make a really nice little keepsake of the series. Instead of being nonsense little plastic bows or buttons or charms, these are instead little recreations of the dresses of the characters, very clearly visually tying them to the characters that they associate with, so they serve as a more memorable keepsake of the series. And making them capable of being turned into a keychain is a great little merch move, since they can be both playline and decorative as the same product. I'd count it as one of the best item-to-toy concepts that the series has had so far. Then you have the Crystal Princess rods. Personally, I think these look a lot worse once you slip one of those keys into the tip of them, but they're plenty fine as the standard attacking weapon of the season for most of the cast. They look pretty plastic, but that's par for the course. I think having a scepter for the princess season is a great choice, and it was a really nice tie into the seasonal theme instead of having to go and make up some random item to be the seasonal weapon. However, I do wish that they were longer. As is, they have a very wand-like appearance because of how low on them the girls grip them. I just think that extending the handle a little more could have given them more of the impression of a royal scepter. They don't have to be full floor length, as cool as that would have been, but because they don't grip them higher because of the light up bit, I would have liked to see the longer back end to them. The Scarlet Violin is the one that actually pissed me off a little, I'm not gonna lie. After spending so much time in the series focusing on just how playing violin with Kanata was important to Toa as a child, and the way that Haruka's playing reached out to her, I think it makes total sense that she would have a violin as her weapon. I even support the way that her weapon is actually Kanata's violin transformed for her to use in this way. What I have a problem with is the way this cherished sentimental item of hers was turned into a hunk of cheap-looking plastic. I get it. You don't want the item in the show to look completely different from the toy to avoid kids being disappointed, but I think you could have done better than this. There's no strings on the violin or the bow, she just rubs a plastic stick on top of other plastic and somehow music happens. I wouldn't have that big of a problem with it if this was a weapon that just sort of came to her, but the fact that it used to be an actual normal violin that had a level of sentimental value and then became ugly plastic personally bothers me. The Music Princess Palace is the big group attacking item of the season, and it's fine. Like, I don't personally love it, and it's weird that it's made from the Kingdom's Castle as a way to hold on to it until they finish things up, but it's not like there's anything truly wrong with it either. I just don't find a few things slotted into it and being twirled around to be a very interesting kickoff to an attack either. I will say it's interesting that each of the girls gets a solo attack with it, though, since it's definitely more of a group finisher type item. And lastly, we have the Princess Lesson Pad. This is where Miss Shimore lives, and the way that the girls can get calls from Kanata over the course of the season. It essentially serves as the tablet-like item to have a digital toy, since the transformation items aren't capable of doing that this season. This is, once again, something that is fine. It's not like the show is shoving this in my face all the time for no reason or anything like that, but it's also not one that comes up a whole ton either. And while, like I say often, I look at these items as items in the world of the show rather than the merchandise that they are, I do always scroll through the bulk of the merchandise that was available for each season to get a look at it, mostly out of curiosity. It's easy to slap Precure all over a ton of different things, so I don't feel the need to talk about every Precure notebook or every Precure Band-Aid. However, I do want to give a shout out to the children's costumes this season, since they really caught my eye. Each of the costume dresses came with 2 swappable skirts, so they could be in either the normal fight version or the longer, elegant version, and I think that is an absolutely adorable way to handle that. Okay, can the seasons maybe slow down with all the different forms for like 5 minutes? Like, I already had 2 lengthy fashion discussions last season because of both the international girls and the Cures all having 2 extra forms. And now this season is serving up 6 extra forms for most of the girls, and that's kind of a lot. I love a special form, I really do. But this is a bit much, don't you think? Especially since some of them are terribly similar for some of the girls. However, I want to talk about the transformations that we have this season because, wow, I think these might actually be my favorite transformation sequences in the franchise so far. Everything is beautifully animated with a sense of movement that really flows. There is just a sense of impact every time something changes or pops into existence with each change, and there is half a second to linger on it so you can really take in that change before it moves on. Nothing gets lost. There's also some key moments that make for really lovely visuals that stand out. Obviously, Minami's backbend with her hair swirling around her is likely the most iconic one, since I had seen that even before seeing the season. However, I have to say I personally really like some of the poses in Kira's transformation. In particular, the 2 poses after her hair shows up are just so full of personality. And of course we have to talk about the curtsy. Are you kidding me? Taking this slow moment at the end of the whole transformation for each of the girls to basically take a bow before the fight even starts. The glittery half-real space giving way into a real ballroom behind them. Beautiful, perfect, no notes. The only thing you can really say against all of this is that the transformations as a whole are a bit long, but a long transformation is rarely played out in full, being trimmed in order to suit the needs of the runtime. And one more thing before getting into the outfits themselves, I want to point out that this season won my favor on the costumes so easily by getting rid of one thing: the transformation item bag. In many seasons, the girls have a bag of some sort on their hip that holds their item that they transformed with after the transformation is over. This isn't in every single season, like how in Sweet the item itself became a brooch on the costume, but it is in most of them, and I have kind of quietly always hated them. My biggest issue is that they often look out of place on everyone but the leads. This is because these carrying bags are usually something you can buy to go with the transformation item toy, and they don't make alternate colors, so everyone in the crew gets the same one, meaning they usually end up all being pink, which may or may not go with the rest of the cast outside the lead. That said, some are less obtrusive than others. Like, the ones in Smile are pretty small and don't draw a ton of attention to themselves, so I'm not quite as bothered. But then you have something like Happiness Charge, where it looks like they have a duffel bag on their hips. Well, except Iona, because she's lucky enough to have the ability to magically vanish her item into her hair decoration, something that makes her design look a lot nicer. Now, I normally don't bring this up unless they look absolutely terrible, since I am recognizing that it's just one of those things that is a quirk of the franchise, and it's unlikely to be something that's going to change. However, this season, it's not there. The perfume bottle just kind of vanishes after they transform until they need it for an attack, and their keys are kept on a chain that is hidden under a ruffle of their skirt, so there's nothing related to the toys visible on them once they're in fighting shape. And I love that. It just makes them look so much neater, don't you think? I know this might be something that is just a personal bugbear of mine, but I think they look so much nicer without the bag, and I wish other seasons in the future would take a similar approach. But I'm not counting on it. As for the actual outfits, though, luckily for the 2 worst outfits of the season, they're all grouped together so I can talk about them as a collective. So in 23rd to 26th place at the bottom of the pile is the Halloween mode elegant from the movie. I'm sorry, but I just cannot bring myself to love these. I get the idea that they're going for in terms of having a pumpkin roundness to the skirt and these long tendrils like a pumpkin vine, but I just don't like these. Rather than looking elegant, they make my girls look frumpy. The one thing I do like is the pumpkin vine curly cues coming out from their headpieces that are also made from pumpkin plant flowers. That's pretty dang cute, but the rest of the outfits are... They're also very, very, very similar, which is why I'm kind of lumping them all together here. The only real difference in the outfits themselves are the bodices, the color of ribbons, and how full the skirt is. And let's be real, you don't notice some of that unless you are looking at them side by side and trying to decide which one is best. If I had to put them in an order from worst to best, it goes Scarlet, Flora, Mermaid, Twinkle. Scarlet is at the bottom because her ruffly arm sleeves that usually look good with the ruffles on her outfit look out of place on this one, and I don't think the cream color of the dress goes very well with the hair. Flora edges her out by not having those sleeves. Mermaid is bumped up by having a slimmer skirt that doesn't look quite as bulbous on her. Then Twinkle comes out on top because her hair best suits the color we have going on here. The bright orange actually looks pretty okay with the cream color that we have going on here and calls to mind the idea of pumpkins in the pumpkin themed transformation, making her just feel the most on theme. Then in 19th to 22nd place, we have the grand princess forms for each of the girls, the big finale form of the season that's meant to be their pinnacle. Love the scepters for each of them, very dignified, very powerful. However, I have to admit I can't stand the rest of the look. The dresses are all basically identical outside of sleeves and skirt volume, and I've never been a big fan of gold as a color in general, so it's already losing points with me for that. I actually don't mind that the dresses themselves are a little on the plain side, since I think there can be a power in that simplicity. Since the gowns are so big and that makes them so grand, you don't need to have a wild amount of details. I also love the cloaks giving a sense of regality. It's just that there are other looks that are better, and this pale set of colors makes all of them look really washed out. They're also very uniform. Once again, the only differences come from the sleeves and the volume of the skirt, but this time their shoulders are covered by the cloak, so for some of them you can barely see that sleeve difference. If I have to put them in order from worst to best, it would be Flora, Twinkle, Mermaid, then Scarlet, but the difference is so minimal that it barely makes a difference in the placement. 18th is going to go to Cure Mermaid Mode Elegant Bubble. So in general, I think that the mermaid cut is actually a cut of dress that I never really care for. Part of that is because it suits me terribly if I tried to wear one, but part of it is just how uncomfortable they always look. This is something that makes sense for Minami to have when transformed, given that her Cure form is named for mermaids, and I do like the other versions, but this one is where the whole thing kind of falls flat. While this is the same general shape as the other Mode Elegance that we see from her, these cover it a little by the way they're designed. In this one, it looks like she wouldn't be able to move much at all, since it seems like it really forces her knees into a pretty tight space in the middle of the skirt there. I also don't care for the gradient on the skirt. I respect trying to go a little different with one of her forms compared to how the others are pretty samey, but it just really didn't work out, and the bubbles all over the bottom and the sleeves feel a little slapdash. It might have been fun if it was something that was a little more seafoam or bubble bath, but that just didn't work here. 17th is Cure Scarlet Mode Elegant. This is just a case of being a downgrade to the base look that's already not my favorite in the first place. One of the appeals of Toa's base form is the way that it is asymmetrical, and this just completely removes that in favor of having all sorts of ruffles. The pink ruffles down at the bottom at the front are the ones that come off the worst to me, though, since they don't even really match with the rest of the waves that she normally has going on. There was a fan-made design that I saw where it made her dress into a ball gown by taking that white skirt ruffle and repeating it down a few extra layers to make it into a tiered ruffle that kept that asymmetricality, and while it might not have felt quite as fancy, I think it might have held better onto the appeals of the design. I also just kind of hate the way that the adjustment of the skirt kind of makes her torso seem like it's practically non-existent. The Scarlet design already has such a high waistline that it makes Toa's legs look very long, but this form takes that even further, making it look like she's 2/3 leg. It hurts even more that it's so low on the list because she doesn't get a chance to have many other placements, since this is her only Mode Elegant design, while the other girls each get 3 to work with. In 16th place, we have our first of the Mode Elegant Premiums, which I'll just be calling Premiums for the sake of simplicity. I'm also going to sort of count the Mode Elegant Premiums and the Mode Elegant Royals as the same form for this, since the only difference is that Royal gets this big lacy ribbon bow that doesn't actually change anything in the design really, and there's already enough here to be ranked as it is. This place is going to Twinkle's Premium. I don't think it's outright bad, but it is my least favorite of the group. I think a lot of that comes down to how the yellow and white are both such light colors that it makes her hair seem much louder than it normally is. I do love the addition of little stars in her hair, and down at the bottom though, that's really cute. And while I know that none of the characters really get any hair changes outside of it sometimes getting longer, there is part of me that wishes we could have either ditched or done something else with her yellow hair ties, since these little puffs give off a bit of a scrunchy vibe, and without that under fluff on her skirt, it makes it seem out of place with this big ball gown. 15th place is going to go to Flora's Premium. This is mostly helped by the pink simply looking a little bit better than the yellow. Once again, I love the little flowers smattered at the bottom of the dress and in her hair, but the hair is what keeps this one from rising higher for me. I love that she gets more big, voluminous hair in order to match the dress, but I do wish the pink at the bottom came up higher on it. With so much of that pale gold hair and this very light pink and white in the dress, she does end up feeling washed out. 14th is Pure Mermaid's Premium. In this case, I think her hair helps a lot as the gradient of blues in it keeps that sense of gradation, so the pale colors of the dress feel a little bit more in place in this design compared to the others. The slimmer silhouette that she gets also helps her from feeling too ostentatious like the massive skirts that the other girls get. However, her bows being the same size despite her smaller skirt does make them now seem absolutely massive, and her extra hair tendrils have been perhaps made a little too big in her hair upgrade. 13th place is going to go to Pure Flora Mode Elegant Lily. Flora's 3 Mode Elegants do very much feel like she had a new skirt shoved underneath her regular one most of the time, and that does feel like a deliberate design choice. But that does mean that most of the time these just look like her base form but bulkier. This one is my least favorite of the 3, mostly owing in the choice of the color change. Because they were adding white, I do think they thought the regular soft pink combined with the white would make her look a little bit pale, so they darkened up the pink, and I don't think it really worked. This pink is a very hot pink, and it's just doing a bit too much. And I really don't care for the way that the lilies look personally. Not a bad design, but it's held back by a few specific choices. 12th place is going to go to Pure Mermaid Mode Elegant Ice. I love this skirt. The way the crystal shapes flow down it is very pleasing, and I love the piece of sheer material added coming off of those. It gives this sense of a layer of frost being laid over the whole skirt. The piece underneath that even has a little bit more of a lavender tinge added to it, which pairs nicely with that lighter icy blue. There is one thing that's really holding it back though. The colors of her top are completely unchanged. The top of her skirt isn't either, which does try to tie those colors somewhat, but those dark ocean blues just don't really feel like they're going very well with the pale colors of her skirt. 11th place is going to be another Mode Elegant, this time Flora's Rose one. This is a case where I like it, but I don't love it. In general, I think it feels bulky, like most of the Mode Elegants have a bit of a tendency to do, but if this is where we are moving after doing the first Mode Elegant she gets, it just doesn't feel like it's much more than a lateral move at best, and I don't really care for the rich red that they add here, even if I do love some of the leafy accents added to the bodice. It just feels very Valentine's Day, I guess. And as we hit the top 10, we have Pure Twinkle's Mode Elegant Shooting Star. Now I will have to give them this. I don't think that Twinkle's costume lended itself very well to becoming a bulkier ball gown, and I do think they really did the best that they could do with her. In this case, I think that the pink coloring is really nice, though I do wish it had overtaken the places where there are purple as well, so it feels like she's not pink from the waist down and purple from the waist up. The only thing really holding it back are the sleeves. I get what they were trying to do with the trail of a shooting star, but it ended up feeling a little more carnival canopy. A step up in 9th place is her Standard Mode Elegant. These two are so similar it's about on par, but the less plastic looking stars, better sleeves, and a more cohesive purple make it more appealing. 8th place is Pure Flora's Basic Mode Elegant, and it's the best of her power forms because it just feels like a natural extension of her normal form. It's not better than her base form, to be fair, since it is a little bulky, but it does feel like the most natural ball gownification of her base form that I can't help but like it a little bit. 7th place is where my bias is going to show. Pure Twinkle's Mode Elegant Luna is my favorite of her upgrades purely on the celestial theming. I am a big sucker for celestial imagery, and the moon chain across the front of the gown just really does something and itches my brain in the right way. It's very astrolabe, and I can't help but love it enough for that to override any other issues I might have with it. Pure Scarlet's Mode Elegant Premium is in 6th for the way that it is the one upgraded form of her that I do actually like, though to be fair, she doesn't have that many in the first place. It's still very wedding dressy to me, but the red coming into that more pink tone keeps it from being as washed out as some of the other girls experienced in this form. It actually looks like her hair was made a little more saturated in order to keep it from getting washed out too, which keeps her from feeling too pale. However, the standout element is that her added little symbols just look the finest out of all of them. They're these bright little sparkles that look great along the bottom of the gown, but look even better carried up into her hair. I debated with myself about 5th place a lot. For you see, if I moved Pure Scarlet up from 5th place, then all 4 of the top slots would be taken up by the base forms of the girls, and no upgrade would have beaten any of them out. I almost did. I really did. But then I looked at Cure Scarlet again, and her big shoulder wings were just staring me in the face, and I couldn't do it. So in fifth place she goes. There is much that I love here. The asymmetrical skirt, the separated sleeves, the hair, the shoes. The only thing that holds her back is the bodice and the wing sleeves, and I can't bring myself to fully love them, even if I appreciate how unique they are. Fourth place is going to go to Cure Mermaid Mode Elegant. It's just the perfect way to take her base form and turn it into a ball gown that I could see someone wearing in the real world. It's beautifully done and gets the closest to reaching the level of her main form, even if it doesn't quite get there. Just a step above it in third place is the base Cure Mermaid form. It's just a downright beautiful design from all angles. If I had one complaint, it would be about things getting a little busy in the neck region with all the different layers going on there. Otherwise, I think she just has this beautiful sense of poise in the way she is designed, and the way that her hair looks like a water droplet is a really nice touch. The way that there is a design cohesion between the gloves and the boots is excellent, but I think my favorite thing about the design is the sort of tail that her skirt has, giving her that mermaid tail element without having to give her an actual full tail or put big fins or something on her boots. Second is going to go to Cure Twinkle. She was not this highly placed for me at the start of the season, but she did grow on me over time. Usually I'm not one for the yellow girls, but this specific combination of yellow, orange, and purple just works really nicely. I love the way that the purple portion of the skirt gives the impression of layers upon layers of petticoats to give her skirt that shape. These pieces of red making sure her face is framed and doesn't get lost in her hair is a nice touch too. There is a lot to love here with this. And that means, of course, first place is going to go to Cure Flora. I have to say that I think this is perhaps one of my favorite pre-Cure designs overall. This is a magical girl. She is frilly and poofy and princessy, all pink and bows, yet at the same time she still seems quite mobile. I love the gradient in her hair, and the crown is placed just right to keep the pulled up portion of her hair from looking silly. I love the fiddly little details like her necklace or the flowers on her gloves being the same as the pin that she usually has in her hair. And that skirt, the way that the flow of the skirt is animated is what dreams are made of. Just the right amount of flutter to accentuate big movements and poses. The hair matching that flow just makes things even better. I've said it before, I will stop rating these pink leads highly when they stop being such damn good designs. But this is an excellent design, and I love it to death. As usual with Precure, I think there is any pairing of these girls that you could put in front of me and manage to somehow justify as being in love or being a little more connected than just friendship. The core cast all has pretty strong bonds with each other, and there is no shortage of little moments that I think you can extrapolate out into a bigger sense of closeness. It's one of those things where you can read it as girls being very, very close, or you can read it as more. It's all up to what you think would be more fun. Like, from the first episode, you have little things like Haruka dancing with Yui while visualizing a prince, and then getting flustered when she realized what she was doing. Yes, the most simple explanation is that she is embarrassed that she got carried away like that, but for some people it's going to be more fun to wonder if she was blushing like that because she was flustered to be that close to another girl who is quite cute. Just like it's fun for us to look at the moment where Minami and Haruka share their first dance together surrounded by sparkles and wonder just why is the scene being presented like that? Or, why is Haruka so relieved to find out that Minami isn't actually engaged like that one guy was saying? What does that say about their relationship? Per usual, there isn't anything solidly textual this time. It's all up to audience interpretation and preferences, and it's helped by the fact that this is a season that doesn't have any of the implied love interests that other seasons have toyed with. Most of the cast are more likely to be wowed by the actions of other girls than be crushing on any of the boys in their class, who don't even show up all that often anyway. And then you have everything about Shut being this foppish dandy, a flamboyance that some of the audience is going to read as being queer in some fashion, but doesn't play in the realm of the derogatory gay stereotypes that we've seen in some past seasons. While some of us might mark this out as being another stereotype, it doesn't feel insulting. Shut is allowed to be a full character with a journey, not some cardboard cutout that's meant to be mocked. He presents in this way, but it's not made into an out-and-out joke. He's a male character that doesn't always act the most masculine. In fact, there is an episode that highlights his love of makeup, and he's not made fun of for enjoying makeup. He's allowed to like it, as long as he doesn't become foolish enough to think that wearing makeup is the secret to defeating the Precure. All that said, while I don't think there is any outright queer romances this season, I do think there is a semi-queer coded storyline, as in a storyline that is not textually about being queer, but is highly relatable to a queer experience. I can't know if this is intentional or unintentional, but Minami's storyline late in the season can easily be equated to a coming out story. She thought she had a path she was on, but a chance encounter with someone led to her world being expanded and her eyes being open to possibilities that she didn't really see as being an option for her before. This leads to her questioning a lot of what seemed so certain before, a lot of inner reflection, and a lot of emotional turmoil as she doesn't know what this means for her and isn't sure if she should stay the course she was on or turn towards something that brings her more joy. She finally finds her answer and then has to confront the next step: telling others. At first, she confides in friends who she is certain will support her, who already know secret aspects of her life that she can't tell anyone else. She grapples with the way that she fears this might change her relationship with her family and the rejection that might come out of that. Her family has always supported her, but this feels different. It's bigger and it changes things. They already have such a view of who she is. If she tells them she's something else, will they accept that? Something doesn't have to be explicitly about being queer to be a queer story, and I think there is a lot of Minami's late season plot that you could map over a somewhat common queer experience, and that's wonderful. Go Princess Precure is likely my second favorite season of the show so far. It doesn't quite reach the point of dethroning my love of Heartcatch, but it got pretty close, which I think is a feat in and of itself. There is so much of it that is really engaging, and at the end of the day, the most important thing is that it's fun to watch. A season can have intriguing storylines and intense action, but if I'm not having fun while watching it, then it might not end up being as worth it in the end. Go Princess is a season that is so easy to binge multiple episodes at a time because it's one that feels like it's always taking steps forward in even some of the sillier episodes. It doesn't entirely avoid slumping a little after the mid-season, as so many seasons do, but it does make a hell of a valiant effort to keep the energy up, and that kept me watching even if the plot wasn't entirely moving just yet. It still feels like our characters are making strides in their personal goals when it might not feel that way with the overall ones. And those characters really do so much for the season. Every season lives or dies on the cast because we are going to spend so much time with them. And this season made most of them feel like whole, rich people, characters you can picture as friends or perhaps on adventures that we didn't get to see. They're wonderful, and that is a real boon to the season. And with the next one, we move on from princesses to witches, it seems. So that should be a whole lot of fun. Make sure you're following me if you want to be aware of when that happens or if I start yapping about something else at length. You can also support me more directly on Patreon, where you can get access to my notes or patron-exclusive Q&A sessions. I've been Mel, and thank you so much for letting me info dump at you.